Welcome, everyone. It's 2 p.m. on the dot in the UK. I'm just going to wait for a minute or two for people to join the session, and then we'll be starting. Right, I can see the numbers at the bottom. People are still coming in, but I will just start with a few words of introduction while we wait. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today for our session on the role of funders in enabling equitable research partnerships for development. My name is Maggie Hines. I am the Executive Director of UKCDR, which is a UK collaborative on development research. And it is my pleasure to co-convene this session today with my colleague, Dr. Gary Aslanian, who is the head of the ESSENCE on Health research group. For those of you who are not very familiar with us, UKCDR is a collaborative of major UK research funders working in international development. For over a decade now, we have brought UK research funders together to discuss priorities and coordinate efforts to garner maximum impact. Our mission is to amplify the value and impact of research for global development, and we do so by promoting coherence, collaboration, and joint action among UK research funders. ESSENCE on Health is an initiative that allows donors and funders to identify synergies, establish coherence, and increase the value of resources and action for health research. The Science Summit at the UN General Assembly aims to develop and launch science collaborations to demonstrate global science mechanisms and activities to support the attainment of the UN SDGs and Agenda 2030. This makes it the ideal platform to explore, discuss, and maybe even agree on solutions to embed equity in global research partnerships. Moving from theory to practice, one of the key questions is, how can research funders and institutions across the world create an enabling environment for equitable research partnerships to drive innovation and solution towards the global goals? To address this question, ESSENCE and UKCDR, together with the support of a global task force of research funders, have engaged research practitioners, managers, and funders across the world to develop a good practice document, 4 approaches to supporting equitable research partnership. It was launched in both English and French last week. We have a very exciting agenda today, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Sumiya Swaminathan, who is Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization. Soumya will be moderating the panel discussion with our 4 global funders from Norway, the UK, Brazil, and Mozambique. We will be hearing their thoughts on the many interconnected aspects of equitable research partnerships, from funding mechanisms and access to coordination and partnerships in practice. Following the panel discussion, we will share some videos to hear perspectives from research practitioners, and we will then open up the floor to the audience for questions that will be moderated by my co-convener, Gary Aslanian. Please do use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to post your questions throughout the event. We have also set up a Miro board that Alice will be introducing, and that will go live after her talk. Finally, please note that this meeting will be recorded, so you can have access to it after the event, and it can also be shared with any colleagues who've not been able to attend. To kick us off, it's my pleasure now to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Alice Chadwick-El-Ali. Alice is our Senior Research and Policy Officer at UKCDR, and she has been leading on this work on equitable partnership. Alice is going to walk us through our new good practice document, how it was developed, what it contains, and how you can use it. Over to you, Alice.
Thanks, Maggie. So today, UKCDR and ESSENCE on Health launch our good practice document, 4 approaches to supporting equitable research partnerships. This document was developed together with a global task force of research funders. And in this short presentation today, I'm going to talk about the value of this document, the creation process, how you can use it, and also provide a high-level overview of its contents. Next slide, please. There has been a lot of discussion across different sessions at the UNGA Science Summit that I'm sure many of you have attended of the value and need for equitable research partnerships. This good practice document goes beyond discussing the value of partnerships and acts as a guide for changes in practice. It was developed by a global task force of research funders from the North and South who provided their expert input and review, and it contains 4 interconnected approaches to guide the reader or user, which you can now see on the circle on the screen. It provides practical recommendations connected to these 4 approaches for how equity challenges can be overcome. And these recommendations are aimed at both research funders, research institutions, and research teams. Crucially, this document does not seek to reinvent the wheel or reproduce work that has already been done, but rather gathers existing case study examples, resources, and tools, and links them to the approaches and recommendations within this framework to guide action planning and implementation. And as Maggie mentioned, this document is currently available in English and French. Next slide, please. So where did this document come from? During a global meeting of international development research funders in 2019, it was agreed that there was a need to move from principles of equitable partnerships to practice. And a project team was put together by UKCDR and ESSENCE on Health, supported by a global task force to achieve this. The process of creation involves synthesizing evidence from a variety of different sources, a global survey, discussion groups, a review of existing resources, the development of learning case studies alongside expert review. Alongside the good practice document sits a resource hub hosted on the UKCDR website, which acts as a live repository of the documents, tools, and resources contained linked to within the document. It's important to say that the data that supports the recommendations within the document comes largely from experiences of North-South partnerships, but we believe it's likely that similar aspects may apply within any other research relationship or collaboration where there's levels of resource or power asymmetry. Next slide, please. How to use this document. So pick an approach relevant to your work or look across all of the approaches together. Within each approach, there are enablers and barriers, recommendations, case studies to learn from, and links to available resources. The recommendations are structured at those 3 levels I spoke about earlier, with an acknowledgement that some require action across these levels, as you can see from the snapshot of the document on the screen now. Look through the recommendations, explore further through the linked resources, and make a plan for how you can implement this within your organization or sphere of influence. In the rest of the presentation, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the contents of the document to set the scene for the panel discussion. Next slide. So we all know equity is important, but some of the key reasons are highlighted in the triangles you can see on the screen now, and these are explored further within the document. Equitable research partnerships help support research agendas relevant to affected countries and communities, support research system strengthening, addressing power imbalances, allow diverse knowledges and experiences to all inform action, all of which enhances the impact that research and evidence can have towards development outcomes. Next slide. We also talk about what equity looks like. At the meeting of global research funders in 2019, participants characterized equitable research partnerships as exhibiting mutual trust, participation, responsibilities, and benefits for all partners, with equal value placed on each partner's contribution. Analysis of the survey undertaken to create this document built further on this definition, highlighting additional enablers and barriers that support or inhibit equitable research partnerships. These can be seen within the equity tree on the screen now. Some of these aspects relate to what might be seen as intangible aspects of relationships, mutual respect and understanding, whilst others relate more to concrete structures that define relationships, such as funder requirements and contracting arrangements. Within the 4 approaches in this document, we provide recommendations that cut across both of these areas. So now moving on to the approaches. Next slide, please. Approach 1, support the research partnership ecosystem. This concerns the attitudes and culture within funders and institutions, an understanding of context and constraints in lower middle income countries and high income countries and how they interact. considering equity across the research continuum and in a holistic approach, so not just at the project level, but more strategically within funder organizations and institutions. Long-term shifts required to move towards equal negotiating power between institutions and research teams in the North and South, and also the monitoring, evaluation and learning requirements for a long-term approach, to learn from what works well in different places, and also acknowledge when things have not worked well and support learning in this regard. For each of the approaches, I picked out one recommendation, which you can now see on the box on the screen, focused at the funder level to inform the discussion later. So the example funder recommendation picked out here concerns how high-income funders can ensure representation of low middle income country partners in the agenda setting. Next slide, please. Approach 2, strengthen the research relationships and research systems. So this again concerns knowledge of context, but crucially building capacity of high-income funders and institutions to understand and respond to the needs of lower middle-income country partners. Supporting respectful research relationships through two-way learning, research capacity strengthening that balances inequities within partnerships, supporting lower middle-income country research institutions and researchers to drive global partnerships. This requires strengthening the support system around research, the management and administrative structures to create that more balanced negotiating playing field. The example funder recommendation I picked out is in the box and concerns these management and financial capabilities and how to support them. Next slide, please. Approach 3, budget for partnership building. Partnership development and maintenance requires time and resources. Direct funding to lower middle income countries is a way of leveling the playing field to ensure these resources are available more equitably. But budgeting is also required at the other end of the research continuum. So thinking about dissemination in terms of both publications and impact activities, especially thinking about dissemination that's driven by context appropriate methods. Follow-on or bridge funding for successful partnerships is another important approach, with investment in relationships that are likely to deliver future successful collaboration. The example funder recommendation in the box on the screen concerns that early stage of partnership development and mechanisms funders can use to support an equitable playing field. Next slide, please. And finally, approach 4, implement processes and procedures that sustain partnerships. So this concerns governance arrangements at the international level, within research institutions, within specific projects, as well as mechanisms for distributed governance and to support equitable decision-making. It also addresses revisiting the terms of research, these big issues of due diligence, contracting, research costing, and intellectual property, and ensuring they're not driven by northern agendas or frameworks, but have an awareness of other contexts and constraints. The example funder recommendation that's pulled out here in the box concerns the role of research managers and the research management function in supporting contract negotiation. Next slide, please. So now is the time to move from theory to practice and for research funders and institutions to implement changes to embed equity in research partnerships and scientific collaboration. At Essence and UKCDR, we would love to hear from you. You can see some of the contact details on the screen now, but we can also share them later. We would love to talk more about this guidance and learn about your own experiences. So do get in touch if you'd like us to present this to any of your networks or colleagues, or to have a further conversation. We would also love to hear more from you within this session about what has not worked well in supporting equity and what has worked well as additional ideas you have for driving change. So please share your ideas in response to the questions on the Miro board, which should be being posted in the chat now. But also think about the questions you'd like to pose to our panelists during the Q&A session. Thank you. Back to you, Maggie.
Thank you very much, Alice, for this presentation. I'm now going to give a brief introduction and introduce Dr. Sumiya Swaminathan. Soumya is Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization, and she brings with her 30 years of experience in clinical care and research, and she has worked throughout her career to translate research into impactful programs. Dr. Swaminathan was Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research from 2015 to 2017. She will be leading our panel discussion today on how research funders and institutions across the world create an enabling environment for equitable research partnerships to drive innovation and solutions towards a global goals. Please feel free to enter your question in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and they will be answered after the discussion. Over to you, Sumiya.
Thank you very much, Maggie. And thanks also to Alice for that presentation on this piece of work. What I was trying to find out, and I don't know, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, good. I was trying to think back a little bit and think about the other frameworks and guidelines that have been developed around this theme. I mean, it's not a new subject, and hopefully we can get in the panel discussion into hearing from some of the panelists. We have excellent panelists on why do we need to come up with this topic again now? Why have we not learned from the past? What about the last 20 years of talking about this? I know that the WHO, TDR, many agencies have been working on this, and yet we haven't made as much progress, right, as we would like. So I think just listening to the presentation, this is what struck me. Why do we need another framework? What makes us think we're going to put this into practice? Do we have a plan for monitoring and evaluation? Do we have key performance indicators? Are we going to hold ourselves accountable? Will each of the research funders, in essence, now commit to being accountable to this framework? It shouldn't be for others. It should be for everyone. And I think that I would like in a year's time to see another convening where the same partners come together and say, this is what we've done to change the way that we make grants, right? Because unless each person starts making some changes in the way they do things, following these principles that you've laid out, we're never going. In another 10 years, we'll have another framework telling us how to do better, more equitable research partnerships. So I think that's my immediate both comment and concern is with this is not new. And what we really should be talking about is implementation, and think about challenges that we've either already encountered or that we anticipate we might encounter when we try to really implement this. And then what do we need to do, right, to really overcome those challenges? So I think for Gary and everybody else, in essence, I would certainly be looking forward to that. Now, having said that, I think this is a really important topic, and thank you for bringing this to the fore during the Science Summit that of the UNGA. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to bring partners together, varied from different perspectives, to really come together and think about this. Because I think it's so important. The learnings of the COVID pandemic should really be leveraged and built upon into something that has some lasting impact, and that we shouldn't say, well, you know, things didn't go as well as we wanted them to, but you know, what can we do? So rather we should say, here are the systemic changes we need to make. And if we just look at the analysis that has been done, in fact, by UKCDR and COPIDAR on the living review of funded research projects, immediately you can see the imbalances there, that more than 90% of research funding went to high-income countries. There's been huge amounts of money invested in research during the pandemic. I think, I can't remember the exact figure that COPIDAR and UKCDR have tracked, but even up to the summer of 22, it was $10 billion or more. And 90% of that has gone into high-income countries. And I think less than 1% actually went into low-income countries. So that very stark figure itself, you know, tells us the story and tells us the problem. I think the other thing that I found was one was this imbalance in allocation of research funding. The second was the lack of coordination between the research funders, right? Despite the fact that there is this grouping, there are many multiple groupings where agencies come together, yet I think their own mechanisms, the agency mechanisms did not allow collaborative research funding to any large extent. And therefore, you found that every agency was funding clinical trials. Many of them were duplicative. They didn't result in any significant findings that could be used for policy. And so what we got was a lot of research waste at the end of it, which is very sad, really, that during a pandemic, this should have happened. And then the third thing, of course, that was very stark to me was the fact that research funding did not go hand in hand with access principles. It did not go hand in hand with a commitment to affordable and equitable access, despite the fact that funding often came from publicly funded organizations which are using taxpayer money, and that the funding could have gone to either public or private institutions. Of course, there was a remarkable display of science and technology, the way that the tools were developed in record time, diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics, it was amazing. Scientific endeavor was amazing. But what was disappointing was that then we have products which are not accessible to people, either because of the cost, because of IP issues, because of restrictions in trade, etc. So there's a gap, a mismatch. And one of the things at WHO that we are hoping really to advance is that we need to build in equity provisions, access provisions rather, into funding grants, so that if you're giving a company $1 billion to develop a product, they must sign in the license, in the agreement, a commitment to providing some kind of equitable access, whatever that may be. It may be a certain percentage, it may be at a certain cost that's provided to the government, because let's not forget that there are people in high-income countries also who don't have access to the product. So we're not only talking about poor people in poor countries, we're talking about people around the world in all countries who don't have access, even though their governments have invested heavily in the development of these products. So I feel very strongly about this. So excuse me if I make this point right at the beginning, but I think it's very fundamental, and there's no point discussing the role of research funders if we're not talking about these very important issues, which sometimes are an elephant in the room and may not be discussed as openly as they should be. And then, of course, public and private interests are not always aligned. I mean, that is it's obvious. And sometimes you have these conflicts. But again, when it comes to public money, when it comes to taxpayer money, I think there is a lot that further can be done. So very quickly, I mean, we published, a group of colleagues and myself, including the heads of the agencies, research agencies from India, from South Africa, from Brazil, from France, from Germany. So it was a number of co-authors with a few academics who came together and published this piece in Nature in February of 2022, which really talks about the new model of doing R&D and what are the principles. And we came up with 10 principles, starting with how you do priority setting, making sure that both the ethics and the science are good, to mandate, incentivize, and facilitate the open sharing of inputs, processes, and outputs, investing in the long term to strengthen scientific, technological, and regulatory capacity across all countries, providing timely access to health technologies that are safe, efficacious, ensuring that research meets the needs of subpopulations like women, children, older people, recognizing all contributions fairly, sharing all the benefits equitably, and then building affordability, availability, and suitability into the whole research process. So those were just a few remarks that I wanted to make actually to set the stage. But really, I think it is, we have a wonderful panel that we're going to come to now and hopefully have some discussions around some of these topics, and maybe there will be other issues as well, which the panelists would like to raise. So I'm delighted that we have with us today Dr. Julia Kemp, who's a Deputy Director Research at the FTCO, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And Julia actually established their East Africa Research Hub in Nairobi and led the bilateral health and HIV portfolios in Myanmar and Malawi. Welcome, Julia. We have Professor Rodrigo Correra-Oliveira, who's the Vice President for Research and Biological Collections at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, Fiocruz in Brazil. And welcome, Rodrigo. He's responsible for the development of strategic activities related to research at Fiocruz. And of course, we all know that Fiocruz has a large network and has a lot of domestic as well as international global cooperation. Then we have Karine Kålsås, who is from the Norwegian Research Council. She has been there since 2011 and has been coordinating the global health funding initiative that was previously called GlobVac. So welcome, Karine. And then we have Edson Faria, who is the head. I hope we have Edson. Is he on? Is the head of finance and administration for the Mozambique National Research Fund in the Ministry of Science and Technology. And Edson is responsible for managing funds with the government and partners, including World Bank and many other partners. Now, do we have all our panelists connected? I see 3, I don't see Edson. Ah, good, welcome. Welcome, thank you for turning your camera on. So what I'd like to do perhaps is to go around and ask each of you to make a statement, like an opening statement, on what stands out for you from this guidance that we've just heard about, and what are you currently doing to support equitable partnerships, and what more could you do, or what could you do more of? So maybe we'll start with you, Karine.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Soumya. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate UKCDR and ESSENCE on this good practice document. As you just said, Soumya, we have been working and struggling with these issues for many years now, and focus on how this can be implemented in practice is what we should focus on. I must say that I find it to be a very useful and relevant guide that covers a lot of different challenges, dilemmas, and questions related to barriers to equitable partnerships, but it is also very practical in the way it presents solutions and ideas, and also case studies showing how funders have dealt with the different issues and try to incorporate equitable partnership into their work. We have been following this document here at the Research Council and given some input. And this process has also been very useful for us and for my department and team working with global health funding specifically. It has got us reflecting upon issues that we haven't necessarily thought about before. And what stands out to me from this guidance is the importance of taking a holistic approach. Because as a funder, we cannot only let it be up to the projects themselves to arrange for equitable partnerships. Equity and perspectives from low and middle income countries must be built into all our work and our processes, from setting the research priorities for our funding via having representation of LMIC researchers and experts where the strategic decisions are being made, but also in the evaluation process of proposals. And not the least, we have to encourage and require equitable partnerships in the projects that we fund. And equity must be incorporated from the onset. That means that it should be catered for from the very development of a research idea and the development of a proposal, through implementation of activities, dissemination of results, and work also related to the more long-term impact of the projects that we fund. So for the Research Council's part, we have only the last years learned a lot when it comes to what we as a funder of global health research and other research that are relevant for developing countries can do to encourage and support equitable partnerships, and we have amended some of our processes to meet this. For instance, in 2020, when the second period of our funding program, previously called GloBack, was ending, we had to develop priorities for a new funding period. And we started with an inclusive process where a working group of Norwegian researchers were appointed to set priorities for the new funding period. But after this working group had compiled a draft set of priorities, they decided to consult an expert panel of senior researchers based in LMICs. So this is an example of how we can incorporate LMIC perspectives into priority setting. And it was a good idea or a good way. It functioned very well for us. We found the input very valuable.
Yeah. Thank you for those insights and your reflection that it's difficult, but that you're making some very concrete steps to change that. And I think your statement that it has to be a holistic approach, a broad approach rather than a project by project approach is really important. Maybe Rodrigo, if we could have your views on the same issue and the theme.
Well, good morning, good evening, afternoon. Thank you, Soumya. And I think that this document, I had a pleasure to participate, a member of ESSENCE, and that actually brought a lot of discussion during the development of the document, and also with the joint meeting with UKCDR. And that actually gave us opportunity to give suggestions on how we should work together and develop these more equitable partnerships. Among the main issues that I think that document shows very clearly is the need for discussions with LMICs more closely, and bring the issues that LMICs see as important for the development of a more equitable partnership into the document. One of the things that have been shown is need for more connected discussions between the different funders and the LMICs. Fiocruz is not a research funder, but develops a lot of programs together, funding cooperative programs between different countries. We have a program together with Portuguese-speaking countries, and Mozambique is one of the countries that we've been working together very closely. And we see that this can be actually increased by bringing together other funders in the different countries that can actually join us in terms of promoting research in Portuguese-speaking country. We also have developed cooperative programs between that would discuss common agendas with developing countries or funders from or universities from developing countries to actually look at agendas that are of common interest and where we can actually increase the capacity by training people, by bringing researchers into Brazil, or sending our researchers into the other countries to show what are the real needs of our countries. So I think this cooperation, and TDR has been a major player on that. Actually, Fiocruz has been helping or working with TDR into training people on clinical trials, and I think this has been very positive. One of the programs that I think are very important is to develop a North-South collaboration. This increases the ability of us to identify major areas of interest and points that we need to attack. So just in brief, I think that this document has the 4 points that are really the major points that brings into our attention what we need to do. Well, during the discussion, I think I can tell you a bit more about my perceptions. Thank you, Soumya.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for that perspective. We go to Julia next. Julia, what do you think?
Thanks, Soumya. So I think I'm delighted to welcome this report. But what struck me most was just when you look at who it brings together. So you've got the partners represented through UKCDR, and together with all of those represented through ESSENCE, the people who've contributed to this. So it's been a wide consultation. And also the springboard of the meeting in 2019 in Tanzania, which brought together International Development Funders Forum with the Science Granting Council's initiative, so 17 different science granting organizations across Africa. I think what it signals, and I think this responds to your point, Soumya, is that actually we've built the consensus, and this bridges the lessons that we've learned from health across to funders who work across a broad range of international research and development. And actually, because it's so practically focused, I think it represents, if you like, a platform for collective working and action. So I think your call to come back in a year and say, what have we done differently, is the right way to go on this one. So the second is, what are we doing? So FCDO works very closely with the UK development funders, and has been a strong supporter of this work. I would point to the work that we do that's led by our East Africa Research Hub, because that whole team really works on building both ecosystems, working in partnership with different countries, and the Science Granting Councils Initiative is a good example of how we're trying to work with science granting councils in different countries in Africa, but also with partners in South Africa with the NRF, and with Canada, and with Swedish SIDA. And really to think through, how can we build those ecosystems to support research that support country agendas. And the second way in which we've worked through the hub in East Africa is to look at the way in which we ourselves fund research through our own funding mechanism. We sat down in 2018 with a meeting chaired by our chief scientific advisor, just to listen to the kind of issues and problems that our fundees and those who weren't accessing our funding in the region would tell us about our systems and processes. And we then put in place some really practical actions to address the shortfall and the shortcomings, including, for example, giving detailed feedback to those who had not been successful, in sharing guidance really early in terms of what we were looking for, and making sure that our payment schedules were aligned to what could actually help institutions deliver research. So, but I think there's still a lot more to do. And you ask us what more? Well, this is not just about single grants or single funding windows. We absolutely need to work across the whole of our portfolio so that the practice is consistent and the guidance that we're giving is consistent. And I don't think any one funder needs to do this. That consistency needs to come across us all. And we need to be working with the funding organizations and agencies in low and middle income countries, because I think that's where we can really come together and say, how is it that we can address some of the inequities? So I do think this is a bridging moment, and I do hope that this is a call to action.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much. So now we come to Edson. And Edson, what is your perspective from Mozambique? How can things be done differently? What can you do from your side?
Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe morning some places. First of all, I'd like to apologize if you hear some noise behind me. I'm on holidays, but I couldn't refuse to accept this opportunity. So I'm here with my family, but my desire to be with you was greater than relax. So in Mozambique perspective, let me just say, I haven't had the opportunity to read all documents, but I have received. There are some similarities I've read partially, and some similarities in things that I agree that has been written there. Let me say that we are part of SGC, Science Granting Councils. We are also part of Science Grants Initiative. That's 17 countries that the colleague was talking before. And as doing partnership, equitable partnership, I would say this is very good and great for all the countries, because we exchange knowledge, we put our researchers among themselves, training and changing knowledge and learning from each other, different culture, But the biggest challenge that we've been facing when we are doing this, it's related to the culture among the institutes. For example, the process of going through signature of contract among researchers and institutions is different from country. You may see ourselves, for example, speed up in Mozambique, but you'll find out some cases in Namibia or elsewhere that it's more complicated. So I do agree that it's very important, this equitable partnership, but we have to design some kind of, how can I say, standards that allow us to enable cultures, different cultures, to adopt such process that will lead us to a good, achievable results. Because if we are strict in some areas, we'll find out that it's not possible to collaborate because some procedures in some countries are different from others. And we cannot forget the political ill also. It's very important, especially in development countries. So these are aspects that we need to consider. I'm not saying they influence science, but they have some power in some related process and procedures internally. I look forward for discussions, and as we have opportunity, we will share our opinion in certain terms. It's good to also to see our colleagues from Brazil, because we are also starting a collaboration via scientific meeting where researchers will find a common interest to collaborate. Thank you, and it's good to be here.
Thank you so much, Edson, and special thanks for connecting while on vacation. So maybe we can go next to the theme of funding mechanisms and access. And I'd like to ask Karine and then followed by Edson to comment on what funding structures or mechanisms can support building and maintaining equitable research partnerships. And perhaps you've already touched a little bit on your previous, but maybe you can just give one or two things that you think are important around how funding structures might need to be reorganized. So Karine and then Edson.
Yes, thank you. It's a good question. Well, in the practice document, we divide between the software and the hardware of equitable partnership, where software includes understanding context and culture and having mutual respect. And this is basic and has to be present for any partnership to work. But funding structures and mechanisms relate more to the hardware and how we as funders can arrange for and amend our work and processes so that we support the work that the researchers and institutions already do in this area, and also to encourage some to think anew and be aware of what is needed for a partnership to be truly equal. So what need to be in place to support building equitable partnerships can be requirements, for instance, to the projects. We have that we use requirements in our call texts at the Research Council, where the applicants need to give concrete and clear answers to how their projects will fulfill requirements for equitable partnerships pertaining to equitable sharing of funds and institutional costs with partner institutions in LMICs, but also they have to include plans for equitable sharing of credits and concrete plans for how the project will contribute to strengthening both individual competence and also institutional capacity in collaborating institutions in LMICs. But what is also important, as I mentioned previously, is that all partners must be involved from the onset for a partnership to be equitable. And as we know, establishing and committing to long-term collaboration based on mutual respect and trust, it takes a lot of time, and it also takes resources. And researchers should therefore be allowed to enough time to develop and work on their partnership and develop their research ideas into strong research proposals. And because of this, I think funding of pre-projects, if you will want to call it that, where researchers and consortia can apply for support to carry out various types of preparatory work, different activities, joint meetings, and other measures necessary to develop a project idea together with their partners can be a good tool. And this will give them a possibility to discuss ideas with new partners also, and to see if there's a basis for collaboration. So I think that can be a mechanism to support building equitable partnerships. And maintaining equitable partnerships is also a question, and there are maybe other areas that you can, other tools you can use.
Maybe we can ask Edson. Did you want to add anything, Edson, to what Karine was saying?
Let me try to be brief. I'll add some, because I've looked at two perspectives. First of all, you have to interact with your co-funder partner from other institution. You have to align the main relevant aspects for both of the countries. For instance, how the call is going to be held, what are the main aspects that you need to be reported, how periodically the reports will be submitted, how will you do the audit process, how do you validate the applications. This is one way before the call be launched. In another perspective is our institution to the research application is to clearly define the guidelines and the operations of the call, how the call will be managed in terms of the duration of the call opening, in terms of who can apply, what are the requirements we have introduced, we didn't have before. It was a requirement came from CDAF, but we used the pre-assessment tool who defines if this institution is capable to implement or not that research, when will be submitted the final results, how monitors will be done, and how the report should be. And of course, the intellectual property aspect is very relevant, and who could access to those informations. Those are the main ideas I just would like to share, and others will come along with discuss. Thank you.
Yes, in my experience also understanding, from the beginning of the data, how the data is going to be handled, who's going to analyze it, who's going to write the paper, who will take responsibility, the authorship, all of this can lead to a lot of unhappiness later if it's not discussed upfront. And if it is discussed upfront, then it can be, sorted out quite nicely. And also there are country rules and regulations about data sharing and about sample sharing. So all of those also need to be considered. And I think more and more the low and low middle income countries want to do things themselves, right? You don't want to be necessarily shipping everything abroad for the analysis or for the lab tests to be run elsewhere. So I think building in, maybe that needs a little bit of training, capacity building. Maybe there isn't a good group of statisticians, but that can be built into the grant to support that analytical work or to support the laboratory assays. So those are some of the things I think to consider, up front. But I want to go to Julia and Rodrigo next to basically for a different question, which is what can high-income country funders do to provide more equitable access to funding opportunities and support research conducted by Southern researchers? How do you get a higher success rate, for grants coming in from the global South, and also for things which are more relevant to those countries? So maybe Julia, you can go first, and then Rodrigo.
Thanks. So I think as funders, we've got a number of actions that we can take, and responsibility to make sure we go through. So first is, how do we make sure that the opportunity for the funding is amplified and available? Now, obviously, with UK funders, we now put all calls together in one place, but actually going much further than that, using the networks that we've built through actively reaching out to researchers in lower middle income countries around those channels. And they were some of the ways in which we learned lessons from the work that was going on through East Africa about specifically reaching out and about building a relationship with our partners in the countries, and also feeding back so that it was clear. The next I think we need to do is really make sure the expectations for equitable partnerships are set out very clearly at the outset. And that's where I think this good practice guidance is so practically focused that it's helpful in enabling that. And we need to use that to then make sure that anyone who sees our calls is clear how we're going to be assessing them, monitoring them, and seeing that they're put into action. And certainly we've attached this already to a call that's gone out to say, look, this is what we're looking for, and we'll keep working on that. And then finally, how do we monitor? What do we expect coming through? And Soumya, you talked a little bit there about, what are we expecting in terms of when authorship comes up, or when data and analysis, where does that take place? How do we monitor that through the research cycle and make sure that we're sticking to the great expectations that we have of those partnerships? And so I think there's a lot that we can do. And in FCDO, we are launching a new approach to work with our research funding. We're going to trial it in a way that we are shifting much more to a grants base, which enables a lot of the ways in which you're speaking. The time to create full partnerships and co-create it should be easier. And secondly, to right-size the level of grants that we're doing, because if grants go out at such a high level, it's very difficult for new entrants, for researchers to gain experience. So how do we get the right size of research grants so that we can build that experience through managing those in partnerships?
Thank you, Julia, for that. Maybe Rodrigo?
Yeah, I think that the points that were raised, that are very important. One way that is over the personal experience with GDR was to develop a program, or what's called the South-South Partnership, and of course the dates meeting was also a participation of North colleagues. The idea was to workshops. Sometimes the researcher that wants to apply for a grant doesn't really understand the process of application of the grant. So that is a crucial point, in my opinion, because if you don't know how you actually elaborate the grant and present the grant to the funder agency, the chance of you getting funded is small. It decreases a lot, and also it gives an opportunity to discuss IP problems, discuss authorship, and all that. And also, these workshops allow you to discuss between the partners what are the main issues that you like to tackle, and these issues become then the grant proposal. So I think that kind of interaction in workshops between all the players allows us not only to know who they are, but you meet the colleagues that would like to develop the program, and also you develop the grant, but just to be applied to the funding agency later. So I think that allows a lot of knowledge exchange that gives an opportunity to actually make it really more equitable in terms of activities that we develop between the partners. So I saw that as a major program that was very successful, and I think that can be actually duplicated in other organizations. Fiocruz does a lot of research in terms of working with different organizations that we co-fund programs, and that also leads to a very interesting project that we discuss the ideas, and the ideas then is actually given to presented to the partners that will actually evaluate the grants and then actually fund. But it's a co-funding program that I think also increases the capacity of you to interact with your partners, also have questions that are of major or interest of all partners together. So I think that that this kind of activity increased significantly the ability of the partners to develop very good proposals and highly compatible proposals.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's a very good example, Rodrigo. The co-funding, I've also seen several programs, including the Welcome Alliance program with Africa, with India, and with other countries, where the co-funding from the government of that country and the Wellcome Trust actually promotes sort of ownership on both sides and more collaborations, but also addresses the priorities, research priorities of the countries where the work is being done. So it's being driven really bottom up. And of course, it rewards excellence, but it's very focused on that equitable, equal partnership. So Edson, I'd like to ask you, since I think you're an expert on monitoring and evaluation, how can funders actually monitor, evaluate, and learn from these different efforts to support equitable partnerships?
Hello, once again. First of all, I'd like to say that the collaboration among different institutions are bringing up the best practice of doing research, monitor, and evaluation and learning. So basically, we have, for example, in SGCI, Science Granting Council's initiative, a pattern model where it's structured what the information and data we should collect in each monitoring and activities, which are collected by each side. What we do is that, for instance, Mozambique do the evaluation for the projects implemented in Mozambique, and Zambia are doing the same in Zambia. So at a certain point, we have a common meeting, which we discuss the results applied and the data collated, and validate also the results. And some countries can travel to others to doing jointly, but it's not obligation. The important is to be validated by each one of the countries. And one thing that is also relevant is if Mozambique partner submit the reports and the Zambian partner does not submit, it's not validated, because this is a joint project. So it means that they both must be implemented at the same level. So one should refer to what others are doing. So this helps us to jointly monitor the project's implementations. And of course, the data shared and the results are also compiled and report back to our funders. Yeah, this is one of the examples that we have. Of course, there are challenges. I would like to, for example, explain when the COVID came, we had some projects and some of them need to go to the fields, and restrictions about how many people they could interview and discuss were applied. For example, in Mozambique, you could not be interviewing more than 10 people at the same time. So they have to restructure, request for a longer time to implement the project. So these are kind of challenges that we have been doing and overcome since the COVID came. But these kind of examples that we are sharing with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Edson. So again, a quick question to Julia and Rodrigo on what can different organizations do to coordinate better to work towards this kind of more equitable global research system? We've talked about things that each funding agency can do, but is there ways to coordinate better? We have many mechanisms, including ESSENCE, but what more can we do? Julia?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because if we each as funders create our own response, our own systems and our own requirements, actually we will have coherence across our portfolios, but it's not really going to help some of the challenges that research organizations in low and middle income countries particularly will face. And when you talk to the research leaders who are working in those contexts, they'll very quickly point to it not being a level playing field. So if you like, not differences in the kind of research support officers that people have to work through the different requirements, very high teaching loads in universities, which don't necessarily recognize how much time is taken in supporting this in applying for research and in maintaining reporting on them. And also, for example, core funding that goes to within different countries or not, and therefore the challenges to individual research organizations. So I think as funders, we've got to work together. We've got to start harmonizing some of these requirements and make it much easier to navigate across us as funders. So just very, very practically, so with the funders for UKCDR, we will work together around how we will come together in responding to the good practice principles. But I think we need to go much wider than that. And I think, Edson, you've talked about Science Granting Council's initiative. I think that's a really good forum for us to say how collectively are we working on these challenges together. And I think there are some really practical ways coming out of that. And maybe back to this forum, how can we continue the work across ESSENCE and others to come back in a year's time to say, you know, what have we done? Where are the practical areas in which we've gone forward? So maybe a question, what more can we be doing in this space?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we need to keep challenging ourselves and saying, what more can we do? Rodrigo, you have some thoughts on better communication?
Sorry, Soumya. I think Julia raised some important points. One point that I think is crucial is actually to approach the funders in the different countries and actually see how can we work together. There are difficulties in the funders understand each other in terms of how they work, what will be the easiest way to develop a mechanism for doing research together, bringing in scientists can actually look into the agenda and actually working together, prioritize the agenda for that, for one call, for example. So I think that understanding each other, it becomes a very important issue. Now, for example, we have our National Research Council here, doesn't really understand how the other research councils work to be able to develop a common agenda and do co-funding, for example. So I think that the need of getting the funders together and discussing how they can work together is very important. And I see that sometimes there are difficulties due to governmental situations, issues, but I think that can be overcome if we really try to understand how they can really understand each other and how they can approach the process of funding grants together or not.
Indeed. And as you say, there are practical challenges, but one has to continue to make efforts. So, you know, we're coming up towards the end of this segment of the panel discussion, but I would like to come back again with one round to each of you, because there are many areas that need to be addressed to ensure that partnerships are built on equitable grounds. And so if each of you can maybe share a few thoughts on one particular area. So for starting with Karine again, it's really research management. You know, what kind of support structures do you think you would need to enable this equitable partnerships going forward?
Yeah, when it comes to research management, that's an important question because as we do know, there are large inequities when it comes to the resources we have at the institutions here in the north, so to speak, versus the resources and administrative tools they have in a lot of LMIC countries. So one way of doing this is I saw in this practice document that there were several examples other funders had incorporated on how that this could be managed by funding directly. Having funding opportunities for capacity building within research management and administrative support activities for the research at institutions in LMICs. We don't have exactly that here at the Research Council Norway, but we have other institutions that are working to build capacity that supports the researchers. But I also think it's important in that sense to have available funding for indirect expenses that also includes funding for the administrative support to the research projects that we fund.
Okay, thank you for that. Julia, would you like to talk about the area of due diligence and risk management, and maybe what needs to change in that?
Yeah, so I think as funders, we need to be really clear on what is required in terms of due diligence and to what level. So, and that we start to, first of all, make that clear to people applying for funding, but also that we see this as a trajectory of change or a roadmap to build capability. So, for example, it isn't a pass or fail, but it's a way of organisations understanding the different levels to which we're looking for this. I think the other thing is if we each have our own, which is largely the case at the moment, then it goes back to the issue that I flagged earlier, that then our partners are then trying to understand across each one of us how there might be different standards, how they can go through those due diligence and processes. So in what ways can we share and validate common data, common standards, so that, if you like, it's making it an easier process for people to navigate. When it comes to risk management, I think it's really interesting when you look at how this happens. So the funder funds an organisation, and they then work with others through the process. Unless it's really clear from the funder what the expectations are, you find that at each layer, it becomes more risk averse, and therefore you're building in more processes and more requirements through chains of funding. So what can we do to, if you like, get that communication really clear, make sure that people receiving funding are not just getting more and more laid on them because no one really understands what the funders are looking for. And finally, I think there are areas where this is going to be challenging, and I think that's something that we all share. So we fund research in areas which are conflict affected. Now, I know that we as a funder and the people conducting the research and the people who then are responding to the research will all share that sense of how do we make sure that we're mitigating risks, not putting people unduly at risk, and really sharing good practice across us all. So if there was one area that we should be really trying to be sharing, because it's complex, it would be in those sorts of areas. And I would be very keen to hear how we can join up on that agenda.
Thanks. And I'm just looking at the chat. There are some very good comments coming into the chat as well, questions, but also lots of good suggestions. So I'd like to go to Rodrigo next to really address the issues of data ownership and intellectual property and how those should be handled.
I think that these are 2 points that usually you have to discuss very thoroughly, mainly because of the fact that if you look at IP, the way I think it should be handled is IP should always be shared between the institutions, participating institutions. This actually leads to a point that we have less conflict, and actually you get more ownership of the data, and it's more equitable, undoubtedly more equitable. And the way it's done, it's actually by having an agreement where all the parties agree to share the ownership, and sometimes to make it open. Or open access is another issue that we have to discuss always. And the data issue that you collect, I think that the data also belongs to the parts and also needs at some point to be shared with the scientific community. So the way we approach usually is that data that we generate is always is a policy of Fiocruz and most of the agencies in Brazil is to always have it open access. I think open access is crucial for the development of science. And most of the time, intellectual property is, like I said, is shared by the participants. So I think that makes it more easier for the partnership to occur, and much better in terms of with all the parties participate equally in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much, Rodrigo. And then finally to Edson. Edson, if you're still there, I wanted to ask you a question about the costing of research, and particularly the recovery of indirect costs, because sometimes you find that those are also very, very different, the kind of indirect costs that are charged by different organizations. So how do we address equity in allocation for that?
Actually, that's a very tricky question, because indirect costs, we normally decide that the organization that receive funds should at least cast the indirect costs and etc. But when they implement activities, there are some costs that you are not expecting to happen, but they come along the process, and you also have to face those costs. So normally we try to negotiate with our partners to co-support the indirect costs. And I have to say, those costs are really important to the progress and implementation of the program. So we need to start consider those as relevant to the implementation of the programs. And it's normally not well, how can I say, previewed. There are some indirects that comes up that the ones that you expected to happen. So for us, it's a challenge, and we will continue upgrading this process. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Edson, I want to thank all our panelists for really excellent, very frank and open discussions that we've had on this topic. And I can see that there's a lot of thinking that's gone in, and a genuine interest to move forward, and a commitment, to keep on working on improving the way we do things, and of course learning and then feeding that back also into the systems that we're setting up. So I think that there's a lot of interest in this topic. Gary, I'm going to hand over to you to perhaps moderate the remaining part of this session. But once again, many thanks for giving me the opportunity, but also to our excellent panelists.
Great. Thanks, Soumya, for finding time for this. And again, it's really very engaging. There is no stop in messages and people putting things on the board. I think what we do now, we have a couple of videos. Am I correct? Of our cases before we go into questions.
Yeah, Gary, we have a few case study showcase as a video. We're presenting a very brief video from ELRA, which is a global charity that finds solutions to complex humanitarian problems through research and innovation. A case study from the Sustainable Futures Network, EDCTP, and also COSTECH, which is a Tanzanian Commission for Science and Technology. I would just like to ask the panelists to stick around for the Q&A session after those videos. Thank you very much.
However, at this point in time, we have the researchers coming from, let's say, outside the community, wanting to do research inside a community. So if they really want to do effective, impactful research, they need to include the local partners, research partners, because they know the culture more. They know the root cause of the challenges and the problems. They can anticipate, because they know the culture and the context, what is the better research question, what are the better tools that could be used. And even those tools, those questions that are posed, they would nuance them, unpack them, and say this question has nothing, it means nothing in this context. They would propose new questions because of their knowledge of the context and the culture. So without them, the research question and the survey and tools used may mean nothing.
The dissemination stage is when people share the findings of their study. And that is also where people go wrong most of the time, especially the North partners, because they got the data that they wanted, they just go analyze, write the research papers, and then start presenting it to the relevant fora. That shouldn't be the case. The case should be you sit together, you write the papers together, and if you give them also co-authorship, because that's their right to have, and because they have been part of the team from conception until the study data collection has been completed.
My name is Mia Perry. I'm the Sustainable Futures Co-Director with Deepa Pulanikatil. As part of my role, I'm responsible for articulating the vision of the network and representing our work to stakeholders. One challenge I often face is the risk of speaking for others and misrepresenting, for imposing a worldview on peoples and work that don't embody the same. I overcome this challenge by listening more than I speak, and by amplifying others' voices and highlighting others' realities next to my own.
My name is Deepa Pulanikatil. I co-direct the Sustainable Futures Global Network with Professor Mia Perry. The network, to me, is like a family of members from various disciplines who are questioning the status quo and exploring new ideas on sustainability for a rapidly changing world. The challenge we face is to balance power and influence in the network when majority of the funding is coming from the global north. We overcame this through a concerted effort to value decision-making collectively, encouraging members at country level to share their ideas in shaping the design and implementation of our projects, and through keeping communication lines as open as a close-knit family can be.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Duclos, and I'm the Sustainable Futures Global Network Manager, and I'm based in Montreal, Canada. As part of my role, I'm responsible for budget management, and one challenge I often face while supporting ethical and equitable partnerships within the network is ensuring that budgets are managed as flexibly and as fairly as possible, while respecting various levels of agreement. For example, with the funders or between institutions or even within research teams. I overcome this challenge by being as transparent as possible with my peers in allowing access to agreements, budget reports, and to understand and listen to the different priorities in each context.
Tackling inequalities in global health research is at the heart of EDCTP's approach. As a European-African partnership of equals, we have a 20-year track record of supporting high-quality, fair and equitable clinical research and capacity development in Africa. We interrogate resource and task allocations in our grants and encourage governance arrangements that require distributed leadership with equitable decision-making, thus enabling African-led research that addresses local priorities.
Pandora is a One Health multidisciplinary network composed of 22 partner organizations. The strategy we have used to strengthen capacities for the preparedness and the response to infectious disease outbreaks has been to empower young generation of scientists and to strengthen the links with the local stakeholders.
The ALERT network has 19 partner organizations from 13 countries. Setting an equitable agenda has enabled us to rapidly initiate research responses to disease outbreaks across sub-Saharan Africa, including COVID-19. The establishment of research partnerships, such as ALERT, is essential to ensure a rapid and equitable response to health emergencies.
My name is Bestina Daniel. I'm working with Tanzanian Commission for Science and Technology as Senior Research Coordination Officer. During my stay at COSTECH, I've been involving in coordinating CEDA overall program. As part of implementing this program, there are a number of lessons learned that have been documented regarding to equitable research partnership practice. Through this partnership, CDR has managed to build the culture of working together between the partners from North and South, regardless of different norms and culture. In the case of COSTECH, the partnership has helped COSTECH to enhance cost efficiency in implementing the program while ensuring wider impact, enhancing COSTECH visibilities to stakeholders that led to increased financial support to research and innovation in the country, as well as strengthening knowledge exchange among the implementing team. Despite of the achievements that have been mentioned, there are also challenges that we face. The main one was outbreak of COVID-19 that will lead to travel restrictions in some of the countries. COSTECH, recognizing the importance of this initiative towards enhancing the quality of research in the country. Therefore, we are recommending on continuing creating awareness for more actors to join the platform, keeping on mobilizing resources to support the program activities, as well as enhance exchange visits among the implementing agents for knowledge sharing and exposure.
Right, welcome back. So I think over the past hour, we've heard a lot from the funders. We've heard a lot about monitoring, evaluation, the need for funders to work together and to set up common frameworks. Now, what we would like to do is open the floor to you in the room, whether you are a funder, whether you represent an institution, or whether you're research practitioners. And we would like you to ask questions to our panelists. So please do use the chat box at the bottom of the screen. And also we still have the Miro board in the background, which is getting quite a lot of activity. So I'm going to hand over to Gary now to moderate this part of the event. Over to you, Gary.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Maggie. And as Maggie said, that we're really hoping that you will engage, although there was no shortage so far. It's very engaging. People are writing on different platforms and providing input, so that's already great. So if you have a question, please do put in the chat room for the panelists, and we can hear a bit more. If it's something that is linked to something that's already been discussed or clarifying even better. And again, Miro board is as well a way for us to collate some of this information as part of this discussion, because it's extremely fruitful. So I'm looking at the list. Perhaps some of the things have already been mentioned. Maybe I could pick them up as people are still maybe typing their way with their questions. So there were questions in terms of how to deal with some of these challenges, and I'll throw it to some of the panelists who want to come forward. Perhaps you could think of more concrete kind of ways to deal with that. There were some questions about Southern researchers be more involved, both in terms of governance as well as peer reviews. How can this be better supported? There were some questions about how this applies to different levels of equitable partnerships. That's another kind of angle. And of course, there was music to my ears, a little bit of a discussion about research management, and there was a comment there about how that can be supported in your own institutions, but also in your parts of equitable partnership arrangements. So who wants to volunteer? I'll still look at the chat if people add questions. Who wants to go first?
I can just tell you a little bit about what we've done in Brazil with Fiocruz, and most universities do the same. We actually develop what we call the Foundation for Research. It's not a private organization; it belongs to the institute. It's part of the institution that does. It's devoted to management of grant. The way that we actually deal with that is by training personnel in our foundations to actually do the management. So the funds usually transfer to the organization in agreement with the funders. They follow exactly the rules that the funder actually has, because it's very difficult to change that. You can actually not change the way the funders want to have you reported for funding and research. So the way we deal with that is that we have a small overhead, it's usually about no more than 10% of the grant, to support this organization. And by doing that, they've been able actually to work with different foundations of different funders to actually manage the grant according to the needs of the funders. So that has been very successful in most organizations, universities and research institutes in Brazil. We deal that way. We are trained by the foundation, are trained by the funder, and the fund then follows the rules of the funder.
Others? Julia, there is a question following your comment about consistency across funders, and that seems to have been well received, and of course we aim for that. Do you want to unpack that a little bit, how you would see that happening? And of course, more funders have very different, diverse ways they do things, and all of that we know in practice. How would you maybe? What are your thoughts of how best we can do that?
Thanks, and thanks to Peter for the question coming back in. So I was, I mean, those of us who've been working in this area for a while will know that this is a difficult nut to crack, and because we each have different systems that we're working towards in our organisations. And in my own organisation, we don't just fund research; we also fund other programmes. So we have to have we have to fit within those standards. We did work. We were looking at and working with the development of a sort of common grants practice, and I think that's something we should be trying to think through and take forward, because if we, as I say, if we can set out the requirements clearly, and that we all talk to each other as funders about what those requirements are, and if organisations then have a way of meeting those with standard approaches that actually work, that satisfy more than one funder, that start to meet those, and that they're certified through whatever method, or we have a way of agreeing that is right, then actually we start to reduce that bureaucracy that we're involving, and the time and the kind of resources that organisations need to meet each different funder. So I think we need to start sharing and looking across those practices. And I think what Peter's also talking about is also consistency. So it's not just funder to the first organisation, but in the whole chain of that working together, because actually it's a complex system when we're funding consortia. How do we start to get some of those good practice standards going across the whole piece? And the other thing, and I did point to this, is that I do think if you have clear standards, it also allows organisations to then work towards a trajectory. So even new organisations, or organisations that need to build up, for example, different ways in which they procure things, or if it's around their, how they handle data, there's at least a roadmap as to the kind of different levels of the standard that we would be aiming for in there. So I do think that clear expectations and the sharing of them becomes really important across funders.
Great, thanks for that, Julia. I'm afraid now the whole world eyes are on us, and in 12 months we'll have to come back and see how we have done in this. But it's a good start for us to continue pushing forward in that area. Maybe Edson, do you have any comments from your side on some of the questions that came from the audience?
I couldn't match really all questions. I would like to start saying congratulations for the videos, because they were a gender balance there. So those things are really important and relevant for us. We saw gender reflected, and this is a kind of signal that we must adopt and found. Related for the most of the comments, I totally agree with what was there, and also with the previous comments of the panelists. First of all, we need to define clearly the objectives. That's why I tell you before we start any co-funding, there is a need for the partners sitting among themselves, discuss about the process and procedures related to how the funds going to happen, how the intellectual property will be benefit to each other of involved partners, how the relevant activities will be done, and also the credits will be shared, and also the results, when they should be presented, how should be presented, how the monetary process will be. So those are the aspects will define the total process in the next level. And I still remain saying the same. We've been exposed to the very good and great councils and scenarios of discussions, such as Science Granting Council, which is a global council where you discuss best practices, and also SGCI, where we also adopt the common methods and procedures in terms of relevant points that should be reflected. So by saying that, you will know what data you should collect, how the monitoring reports should be put in place, and when and how we could close the project. So I would like also to emphasize what Rodrigo says, the opportunity of, sorry, my internet goes and comes back. That's the challenge of doing this. The opportunity of putting researchers together to define a common interest and apply for an opportunity is very relevant. So thank you. I don't know if there is any relevant question that I skipped. Please let me know and I'll come back. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's good. Karen, do you have any comments? And maybe the other aspect of this could also be, what are the things that we know don't work? And do you already have that experience? We are recording, but we won't be taking you into the super scrutiny on that if you want to share. So any of the panelists can say, never do this, because that's never going to help. Karen, you want to start, and then I'll challenge the others after?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I agree with the other panelists on both on any all the things that I said, the things that Edson said about discussing co-leadership, publications, co-authorship, budgets, intellectual property rights from the start in projects are important, and this is something that we as funders can require the projects to do. I also agree, of course, with Julia that we need to talk and to share ideas, share standards, try to find ways in order to align our standards and our what shall I say, requirements towards partners, to make it a bit easier for institutions also in LMICs to meet our requirements, because they meet a lot of different standards that is very resource demanding. When it comes to what does not work, that's a good question. A tricky one. I think there's a lot of things that we've done over the years that does not work. I think we should have a focus on this holistic approach, trying to, bring in the idea of how we can secure equity in all all the processes that we do from the start and through the projects, and that we don't kind of forget that, and that we continue to discuss this issue and share ways of dealing with different challenges. There's a lot of tricky questions and tricky challenges that there are not, you know, a standard solution to. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, so maybe one quick tour of the other panelists. Think of the questions raised. Again, think of the original couple of questions I asked in terms of some of the incentives that can drive the change, some of the questions people ask if how the peer review can be more inclusive and engage LMIC researchers. Also in terms of how we can better apply some of these principles at different levels. So any reaction for that. And if you want to ask a question, maybe audience, you can start raising your hand if you want. Feel free to do that if that's easier. Maybe can we go with, oh yeah, okay, Edson, you have your hand. Okay, I don't even have to ask.
Thank you, Mr.
Panelists are very active.
I wanted to contribute on what didn't work, because for us it's very relevant, and due to the panelists, we can send a very clear message about things that bother us. For instance, the process of a funder support directly to a research institution in country, it didn't work because the report process is not good also. Institutions seems to report back to the ones who disburse funds. So we had agreement in the previous scenario of Science Granting National Initiative phase 1, where they disburse directly to the research institutions, and they ask our institutions to do the monitoring and evaluation process, and they were not comfortable on reporting on us because the funds were not coming from our side. That's one of the scenario that I was saying. Another one is to impose in country, because the culture is very different. You cannot say you are delaying the process of signing a contract because you don't know how the process in that country functions. So those are the kinds of things that you need to consider when you're doing equitable partnership. So regarding to this last question, I want to contribute by saying FNI has adopted a manual, and we try as much as possible to incorporate one of the members, one of the panelists of the monitoring and evaluation process to be part, of the evaluation process to be part of the monitor and evaluation and learning process on the field. So when it's possible, FNI, when it goes to the field to do the monitor and evaluation process, we incorporate one of the members that evaluate that proposal, so that we contribute and ensure that quality is being done as proposed in the previous scenario. Thank you. I won't take longer.
Okay, great. These are great reflections. Thanks for those specific examples, Edson. Julia or Rodrigo?
Gary, you're asking us for what doesn't work, which is always a tough call.
That could be, yeah. Or incentives. How can we do it better?
Okay, so I reflect, and I know my colleagues do, that we as funders just, you know, we have an incentive to meet targets and deadlines for research calls. There's always an imperative. I think the incentive is always to put it out too quickly and not to give the time. I was really pleased that was one of the recommendations that came back through the report, that we give sufficient time to enable partnerships, and maybe we can't do that necessarily in terms of awarding, but we can allow time around the inception to get these good practices in place. I think that was a really important message that came through in the principles. And then the other, my own personal reflection, and I've worked in this area for quite a while is, you know, I've watched different research calls go out and how the partnerships have been formed or whatever, and you know, there's a lot you can embody a lot of those good practice principles. I learned quite early on, though, you have to watch how budgets are allocated and shared and how openly they're worked through with partners. And again, I was really pleased that that came through as one of the areas that we do need to be watching as funders, because actually we do need to make sure that there is that openness of communication in the research partnerships that we fund. So you're asking me where, you know, lessons that I know don't work well, and I have seen they are reflected now in the guidance that's coming back to us.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Julia. Yes, Rodrigo?
Oh, yes, I just want to say that one thing that does not work is if you open a form for the first time and decide to apply for a grant. Most of the time, that does not work well, because sometimes you cannot understand. It's quite complex, the way it's organized. So the way I suggest, I think the thing that we should do is to have people that the LMICs can consult with in the funding agencies, consult and help to get the grant put into the forms, how to organize it, how to make the budget, how the budget should be explained. Because a lot of the times, this is the most difficult part of the process. Writing the science sometimes is not the problem. The problem is related to the forms and how to actually put it together and apply. So I believe that it's very important to have people that are actually devoted to helping develop the project and applying correctly to the funding agencies. It's a lot of the times that we in LMICs actually do not get grants because we made mistakes in putting together the forms. So I think that's crucial. That's my main suggestion on that.
Right. Thanks. Simple but crucial, right? Thank you. So there is a question earlier on reflecting on the research management aspect of how best that could also help in terms of increasing our efforts when it comes to equitable partnerships, and in terms of both management and communication. So does it mean that the research management can be or should be considered as an important role in that mix? Do we need to think of research partnerships that support also these kinds of professions, or the complex research collaboration kind of experts or people who can engage in these kind of multinational, multi-layered, multi-funding agency experiences? What are your thoughts on that in terms of capacity? I think one of the panelists already earlier on, I think was Karine, who reflected on the unequal kind of state of this when it comes to different countries being ready, or different institutions or different partners being ready to manage this. What are your reflections on that aspect? Who wants to go? Karine, you unmuted yourself, or?
Well, yeah, I already reflected a bit on that. I don't know if anyone else would like to to add something.
Hello.
Yes, please.
We do think it's crucial. In Mozambique, we think that to incorporate the equitable partnership, you need to understand your partner and you need to work with them. So it's good to have exchange visits among the co-funders so that they learn the process and the others you can maybe improve. Research management, it's a complex scenario in terms of all the process, including the due diligence process. You need to understand how do you ensure that the funds were exactly directed to what was expected to be done, and also how to report back to each other, how do your partner do things. So for example, we have a grant management system and one of our partners didn't have. So how do you deal in terms of acceptable of receiving proposals from one of the sides? So you need to understand how that side does the process and try to accommodate some things that it's acceptable for your side and validate some process. So we do think that on the research management, the exchange visits and training jointly, it's relevant for the process. Thank you. That's my personal opinion, and also my institution has done a lot of activities related to that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Julia?
It's really to support Edson in that I think quite often the research collaborations that we fund are very much led at the academics level, and it's around the ideas and it's around the research itself. And actually, it's bringing together the research management of people of the consortium that is as important, if not more so, in some of the cases, because not only is it sort of ensuring that when there are partners that we're working with in low and middle income countries who don't necessarily have all the systems that the consortium will have to bring to bear, it's not only building their capability, but it's also building the understanding of all partners in the consortium. And I've sat and met with research managers in the UK, and they also, if you like, don't have the experience of working and traveling to necessarily all the institutions. So they are themselves looking for how do we put this into practice? How do we come together and share at our own levels? And I think, again, I was pleased to see that had been picked up in in what's being documented in the report. It's not just about at an academic level, but it's really on the systems level that we need to be building that sharing and partnership as well.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Julia. Panelists, anything else that you wanted to reflect on from the good practice document, from what you've heard so far? An important aspect that we have not covered that you really want to reiterate or share? Yeah, Edson?
I just want to emphasize Mr. Rodrigo comments on the approval of proposals and also lunches calls. It's very important to train the benefits of the proposals, how they will use the funds, how they report back, how they apply. So those things for me should be considered as high level risk, because once they receive funds, they don't know how to apply. It's difficult to correct an amount that has been overspending in a different process and procedures. So it's relevant to train them before they start using and applying the process and procedures during the implementation. That's one point I want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe this is a time we have maybe 10 minutes or so quickly to.
Oh no. I was just standing there. I'm like, you can, I know, like you can tell that it's like just above the plasterboard. And
okay. Someone needs to
like
be
little
unmuted.
feet. Like it's like, I feel like it's unmistakable.
Oh.
And it's like,
what do we do?
I think we may need to.
Somebody needs to be muted.
Yeah, could the audience put themselves on mute, please? We're hearing someone.
Okay, great. So I'm back. Anyone in the audience wants to share their own experience and maybe give an example of their experience, or what you think of how that kind of can enrich the good practice document and the way we look into implementing it, or you worked on something you want to share, you can simply raise your hand and just say who you are and share your experience in addition to this rich discussion we had, please, because there are almost over 100 people in the room, well, a virtual room. I don't see hands. Raise your hand. Okay, Dr. Sekvela.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good day, everybody in the meeting. I'm Dr. Sekwela from Botswana Open University in Botswana. I have been in this area of research management for years now. Where I am now, I'm the Director of Research and Innovation. One of the things that is really probably not addressed is the fact that research management is a new concept in many of our universities. Researchers have been on their own for years, and they tend to see research management as managerialism. And to me, I think we need to approach this from an institutional level point of view, including even the leadership. I've just shared now with the team that presented from the UKCDR my poster that I presented in 2018 at one of our research managers conference. The issue really is that when the researchers develop collaborations between South and North or South-South, research managers are not usually part of the process. They only come at the end when money comes in, meaning that we are unable to reconcile our experiences from the South and the North, such that when the management of the funds come up, we in the South find that we are at a very different level of experience on how to handle funding as per the requirements of the funders who are normally from the North. Yet our counterparts at the Northern Hemisphere are much more conversant with research management issues. That is the issue. And in that poster, which I shared with the UK, I'm saying, I think the suggestion that we should be having funding for research managers of both institutions that are proposing to collaborate, being part of the discussion at the beginning is very, very critical. So I think that funding is really important, and I'm happy the presenter from the UKCDR talked about the funders making sure that there is funding for processes that should also start to look at management of the research and the collaboration right from the beginning, not let the researchers finalize the collaboration agreements and then bring in the research managers. To me, that is really where we're missing it, because like I said, those of us in the South, we find that we are not really up to date with other the new current developments in terms of research management, more especially from the North, where the funding usually comes from. Thank you, Chair. I hope I contributed to discussion, something useful. Thank you.
Great, thanks for those thoughts and reiterating those specific aspects. And as you said, it's already partly in the document, but it's good to know that this is an important area and you've been looking into that from your vantage point and from your daily work in Botswana. Thanks, and I saw your email already. Other hands? Yes, Alan Mokwana. I think you're in Kenya.
Yes, Gary, I'm in Kenya. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Arlen Mohona, and I work with the Science for Africa Foundation. We are here in Nairobi, but operate Pan-African. We operate on a Pan-African level. So I think this good practice document should be read and implemented with the good research, sorry, I forget the name, costing and pricing document for LMICs, because there are several nuances around research management that will come out very clearly from the other document that are not necessarily amplified in this document. So I think it's important for us to implement them together. And maybe just to say that I think there's a knowledge gap from both the funders and the academics at institutions on what research management is all about. And I think it's important for us to fill that gap, the knowledge gap, so that it's clearly understood that research management is not just an administrative function, but it is a strategic function for the organization as well, because it's looking at systemic issues at the research institutions, which include things like equitable partnerships and how those are built. But it's also looking at the human capital that is within the research enterprise of the institution. I think that's quite key, that we bring out those different nuances of the field. Thanks, Gary, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Great, thanks, Alan, for that additional support for really approaching this in very comprehensive manner with appropriate capacities and appropriate expertise and in the mix. So quickly, our panelists, you've heard some of the comments as well from those who have joined us, and clearly, because it's a virtual meeting, not everyone is raising their hands, but the Miro board is a proof that people have been adding a lot of information there, and I'm actually quite surprised. I thought that it might be a lonely couple of comments, but it's very interactive. So panelists, you want to say your sort of last concluding remark? What is your takeaway as a panelist? Maybe I'll put, who should I put? Julia, I'll put you on the spot.
Thanks, Gary. So what are my takeaways? So I think a number of us around the table here have worked on this for a long time. And I'm going to go back to, if you like, my opening hope and a reflection from the beginning of our discussion. This isn't problem solved, but we are seeing, I think, a growing consensus of some of the practical ways in which we can take it forward, and a very clear sense that as funders, we do need to work together on this, because otherwise, you know, we're just creating. We may have internally consistent systems, but that won't solve the problem. So my takeaways is certainly to think about how do we internally take this as a whole of a portfolio approach, but really wanting us to be working with the other funders here, and let's find ways of doing that very practically, and maybe come back in a year and say, what have we done?
Thank you. That's very that's excellent. Thank you very much, Julia. Karen?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the main takeaways from this discussion for me is the importance of sharing good practices between funders that has been mentioned by several of the other panelists today. And we should be looking into how we can align our practices and work for a joint agenda to enable equitable partnerships. I also found the discussion on research management very interesting, and that this has both a strategic and administrative function, and the importance of enabling capacity building for research management and how we can do this. And again, I would like to bring up the the holistic approach, that we should look at equitable partnerships, or how to get equitable partnerships into praxis. We should look at different, you mentioned different levels, Gary, and how can we ensure this in our priority setting, in our decision making at the funders' institutions, and we should recruit experts from LMICs to assess applications that we receive for our calls. So yeah, it's a lot of different areas that we can look into and work on, and see in a year how far we have come.
Thank you. Rodrigo?
Thank you, Gary. I think that the taking away message is that we need to do the next year, increase ESSENCE and UKCDR movement towards having implementing some sort of program that we can make the interaction between scientists and LMICs and the non-LMICs to have a new way of approaching grant proposals. So I think that we have 1 year to put together this program, and I expect that in the 1 year we have some answer to all researchers on how to make it more, we make it easier to actually work together between the different countries, organizers, organizations, and funders. So that's how I see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. There is a poll that you need to quickly fill up. Those who have joined us, please do if you see a poll. And Edson, are you still there? Maybe not. All right. So just fill the survey, please, if you have a second. And again, this was really very fruitful discussion. We do hope you will be the proponents of dissemination of the good practice document with us in this process. So we do hope that you will help us because this is not one of kind of a event or a process. This takes time. So we do hope that you will help us in this process. So on behalf of the organizers, Maggie, our team, ESSENCE and UKCDR, we thank you for joining us, and we hope to be in touch and continue this important work.
Thank you, Gary. And just to reiterate my thanks to all the panels, thank you very much for your contribution today.